time to find my favorite book of 2022. I did this last year for the first time where I went through every single month and picked my favorite book that I read each month, threw them in a bracket, and narrowed it down to figure out what my definitive best book of the year was, because it's always so hard when someone asks you what was the best book you read and you think of like 15 different options. I wanted to narrow it down to just one, and we're gonna do that again today. I have some sense of what I think could be top contenders, but I really truly don't know what's going to win until I go through this whole process, so it's gonna be just as much of a surprise to me as it is to you, and I love doing this as a way to look back at everything I read this year, so I'm super excited. Let's jump on it. Okay, so first we're gonna go through my reading spreadsheet and go through every single month what I read and pick out what the top book was for that month so we can add that to the bracket. Starting with January. I read quite a bit in January, and a lot of these feel so long ago because the year just feels so long. But if I had to pick a standout favorite, I already feel like The Burning Girls is a good top contender because I know that was a favorite of mine. I also have my star ratings here for reference so we can look really quickly, and I didn't have a ton of great reads. That was my only 5-star read. And then for 4 stars, I had This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno and Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. But out of those 3, I feel like it's a pretty clear choice that The Burning Girls has to be my favorite pick from January. Next in February, we had a couple 5 stars, Your Guide to Not Getting Murdered in a Quaint English Village and Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. I feel like that's a pretty easy choice. But out of my 4 stars, did anything topple that? The Harpy? Nope. These Silent Woods, nope. It Happened One Summer in Anatomy, nope. Crossroads is definitely gonna have to be the top pick. That is my favorite horror novella that I read this year. That's definitely going to be a standout. Next in March, I did not have any 5-star reads this month, but I did have a couple 4 stars. We had Good Rich People, The Book of Cold Cases, Yes Daddy, and Perfect Days. So I feel like for me, this would be between Perfect Days and Good Rich People. And I definitely remember Perfect Days more than I remember Good Rich People, but I feel like in the moment I probably liked Good Rich People more. But if you had to ask me now, which I feel like is how I should operate, I feel like I'm gonna have to pick Perfect Days, which was just a really fun thriller that I enjoyed reading. Next for April, we have one 5-star read, which was Sundial by Katrina Ward, and then one 4-star read, which was My Dearest Darkest by Kayla Cottingham. I feel like Sundial is definitely the obvious choice here because I did love that horror book so much. In May, this was another big reading month, and we have a couple 5 stars. We have Book Lovers by Emily Henry and The Island by Adrienne McKinty, and I think that was it. A couple more 4 stars in here, but it would be silly not to just immediately pick The Island because I know I just really love that. That is one of my favorite thrillers I read this year. I also really did love Book Lovers, but if you're making me choose between the two, it's a pretty easy decision for me to pick The Island. Next in June, we have some 5-star reads with Heartstopper Volume 3 and 4, and those were my only... Oh no, I also had Confessions by Kane Minato, and that one I feel like it's going to be the top contender for sure. I'm looking at my 4 stars, which I enjoyed, but nothing in this list really beats out Confessions for me. That is just one of the best books ever written in this world. Next up in July, I did not have any 5-star reads. My 4-star reads were The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay, Runtime, Spy Family Volume 1, Any Man, and Exquisite Corpse. And I would probably be between Pallbearers Club and Runtime, and I feel like I have to pick the Pallbearers Club because I just really do love Paul Tremblay's stuff. Next up in August, for 5 stars, we only have one, and that is Unlikely Animals by Annie Hartnett, which I did really love. That feels like the obvious answer here. Let me check my 4 stars. We had The New Neighbor by Carter Wilson and Belladonna, and Below by Laurel Hightower, 4.5 star, which I did really like as well. But Unlikely Animals is just one of the few books that I read in that other bucket of my reading where I like to read some literary fiction with some magic elements in it as well, and that was just a really beautiful, impactful story, so definitely going to pick that one. For September, I feel like this is gonna win. The Housemaid by Frida McFadden was a 5-star. Spy Family Volume 2 was a 5-star. A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, that was a 5-star. Oh no, I'm gonna have to pick between A Head Full of Ghosts and The Housemaid. This is actually a tough decision because The Housemaid is like a fun, fast-paced thriller, nothing unique, but just had a really good time with it and could not put it down. A Head Full of Ghosts, I feel like, is a literary masterpiece. So I feel like I've got to pick that. I have to pick the literary masterpiece, right? Right. So we're gonna end up with 2 Paul Tremblays in the running for this year. Next in October, I did not read a ton in October. That's unusual. I usually read a lot more. I guess I read more in September this year and then got a little burnt out in October. But we have a 4.5 with Spy Family Volume 3, and then 4 stars with The Weight of Blood and Autumn Crow by Cameron Chaney. I feel like Spy Family Volume 3 being a 4.5 star doesn't really outweigh the 4 stars for me from these other full-length novels, because as I keep reading more of that manga series, I'm just like, yeah, I love it. I love these characters. But it itself as a volume, I don't even remember which character Spy Family Volume 3 focused on. I just like it more as a bigger part of the whole. So I feel like I'm gonna have to choose between The Weight of Blood and Autumn Crow. And I think I'm gonna choose Autumn Crow because I did really like that short story collection. And I'm kind of surprised I only gave it a 4. I think I might bump it up. Next in November, another big reading month. We have The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston as a 5 star. We have We Spread by Ian Reid, Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris, and then a lot of other 4 stars as well. So for this one, if I have to choose between The Dead Romantics, We Spread, and Behind Closed Doors, I think I'm gonna have to choose We Spread because that was just such a personally impactful story and I just loved it so much. And then for December, I'm still in the middle of December, so I'm cutting my reading off to what I've finished so far in the first couple reads of December. And the best book standing out by rating is The Measure by Nikki Erlich, which feels correct to me. It wasn't a 5 star, but that's definitely the best of what I've read so far. Okay, so now I've got my favorite from each month loaded in this bracket, and I can shuffle these around so that it mixes them all up. So I think I'm just gonna click that an arbitrary amount of times until I feel like it's all mixed up. And we'll just get it super duper shuffled until it feels good. And now the hard choices begin. So first up, we have to choose between Perfect Days and the Pallbearers Club. Perfect Days was a really fun, dark, twisty obsession story. It reminds me a lot of the story You, which is both a book and a Netflix show, and it was a lot of fun, and I loved how dark it was. The Pallbearers Club was a really unique psychological slow burn. I loved that it had annotations in it. I loved the characters, but it was a more slow burn story where not as much was happening. It was more of a character examination. Oh my goodness, this is instantly already so hard. I feel like in my heart, if I was just asked without thinking about it, I would say the Pallbearers Club, but looking at these pinned against each other, I feel like I would actually pick Perfect Days because that one was just more fun. So I think that's gonna have to be the winner. That's really sad because I thought the Pallbearers Club would have a better chance, but that's what my brain is feeling right now, so that's what we have to go with. Next up is The Island versus Confessions. Those are like my top 2 favorite books of the year. Oh gosh, okay, The Island, super fun thriller, so fun, devoured it, absolutely loved it. I love survival thrillers. I had so much fun with that one. And I wasn't expecting to love it because I had heard no one talk about it. I read it as an ARC, and so I kind of got to feel like I discovered it for the first time without any bias. Whereas Confessions is this book that's been loved for years. It's gotten so much praise, and I thought surely I'm not gonna love it as much as everyone else does. And then I did. I did love it. It was like a jaw-dropping story, so surprising, so dark, so sinister, and so well written. The Island is more like a fun, not cheesy, but like it's more of a popcorn story for me. Whereas Confessions, I feel like on a literary level is by far the better book. And I don't know if I'm always going to be rating that way. Like sometimes I weight literary merit over, but sometimes it's more about personal preference and had a fun time. But for me, it feels right to choose Confessions because of just how fantastic it is. So that's what I'm gonna have to do, but don't expect there to be any consistency here because I can't guarantee what I'm gonna be rating on other than what I feel like I have to choose at the time. Next is The Burning Girls versus A Head Full of Ghosts. I had so many really good reads this year because pinning these against each other feels so much harder than I expected it to be. I genuinely loved both of these, but again, similar to Confessions, A Head Full of Ghosts just has that literary merit to me where it is just a work of art. And The Burning Girls was more just a fun thriller with horror elements in it, but A Head Full of Ghosts is like, I wish I would have written that. It's so good. So I feel like I'm gonna have to pick that one. And then next is Crossroads versus Sundial. I really enjoyed both of these, but Crossroads just hit me on an emotional level that I was so surprised by. cry because it's such a short little novella and it packed such a punch. And if I had to think of critiques for both of them, I can think of some critiques for Sundial, but I can't really think of any for Crossroads, so I'm gonna have to pick Crossroads. All right, going into the second round, we have The Measure versus Perfect Days, and this is not much of a competition. It's definitely going to be Perfect Days. I did really enjoy The Measure. It was really good, but it's not an all-time standout favorite for me. It just happened to be the best book I've read in December so far, making it on this list, but Perfect Days does stand out more for me. Next, we have Confessions versus Unlikely Animals, which is an unfair comparison if I've ever seen one. Confessions is dark and psychological and about revenge. Unlikely Animals is emotional and heartwarming and about the human experience. And oh my goodness, how do you choose between those two? I don't know. I don't want to do it. I feel like I have to pick Confessions. Confessions made my jaw drop. It got an emotional reaction out of me. Unlikely Animals, I don't remember if I cried. It did make me feel emotional, but Confessions just, oof. That was more impactful to me as I remember it now, so that's what we're gonna pick. Next is Autumn Crow versus A Head Full of Ghosts, and this is an easier one for me. I'm definitely picking A Head Full of Ghosts. I did really enjoy Autumn Crow, but A Head Full of Ghosts just is top tier for me. And next is Crossroads versus We Spread. Two of the most emotionally impactful stories that I read this year. I did read We Spread a lot more recently than Crossroads, so that feels more recently impactful, which is a little bit of what makes me think I'm drawn towards We Spread. But Crossroads, I don't know, they're both so good. They're just both so good. Okay, my deciding factor between these two, in this instance, changes every time, is if I had to write an essay about one of them, which could I write a better essay on right now because it lives with me so well? And surprisingly, I think that's gonna be Crossroads. I read it longer ago, but it just lives with me more. So that is what we're going with, and I don't want to second guess it. Now into round three, we have Perfect Days versus Confessions, and it's getting a little bit easier at this stage, I think. Hopefully this is less painful to have to make these decisions at this point. I feel strongly convicted on Confessions. That's what's going to be pushing through. And then we have A Head Full of Ghosts versus Crossroads. Oh, such a hard decision. It's not getting any easier. A Head Full of Ghosts was a lot longer and more complex than Crossroads, in my opinion, because A Head Full of Ghosts is doing a lot of different things. I don't know, I feel like I don't need to think about it too much. I think I just choose, and I think I just go with A Head Full of Ghosts because that feels right. And finally, that brings us to the final round, my top two books, Confessions or A Head Full of Ghosts. I want to reread both of them right now. I'm not going to do that, but I would love to reread both of them to know and choose, because both of these I actually listened to on audiobook, which is surprising that they ended up being standout favorites for me, because usually audiobooks aren't a standout favorite for me, but these stories were just so good that they stood out for me even though they were audiobooks. And then I purchased the physical copies for both of them afterwards, and I want to reread them physically and like be able to spend more time with them. And oh my gosh, what a decision. Okay, well, before we have to choose, I just want to say I love these books. I love both of these books. This is great to have two top favorites of the year that I can quickly think of. Confessions by Minato and A Handful of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. That feels right. That feels good to me to say those were some of my top two best books I read this year. So congratulations to those two books. You made quite an impact on me this year. If I have to choose between the two of you, I do have more of a history with Paul Tremblay. I've loved multiple books from him, so I feel like that's impacting me, but I've got to choose quickly and I've got to just let it feel right. And I think I'm choosing A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. So that is it. That is my favorite book of 2022. Wow, I really might try to reread it again before the end of the year. I never reread, but I want to reread both of these. I love them both so much. I love all of these books so much. Anything that made it into these brackets, they were amazing. They were wonderful. I loved all of these books. Highly recommend picking them all up, and they all showcase a little bit different things in what I like in my reading across horror and thriller and magical type books as well, or emotional type books. It was just such a good reading year where I got to discover so many good books, so many new favorites, and as hard as it is to choose between them, I'm very glad A Head Full of Ghosts made it out on top. Hopefully you had fun watching this. I had a lot of fun making it, even if it was some really hard decisions I had to make along the way. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite book of 2022 was. If you can decide, if you want to do a bracket, that would be really fun too. But just a warning, it is very hard to choose between your favorites. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!